Good morning and welcome to the July 2024 board meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA as we prefer to call ourselves. My name is Graham Cook and I'm standing as interim co-chair of the MHRA alongside Mandy Calvert and Michael Whitehouse, and my role is to lead us through today's agenda. I must start by reminding everyone this is a board meeting held in public and is not a public meeting. It's also important to explain that the board is responsible for agreeing the strategic direction of the agency, maintaining high standards of corporate governance and scrutinising the performance of the MHRA, but it's also important to clarify that the board does not make any regulatory decisions on any medicines or medical devices. This is because regulatory decisions on individual medical products are made by ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care on the recommendation of MHRA officials, with the addition of independent advice from our expert advisory committees such as the Commission on Human Medicines. As far as today's meeting is concerned, and following the announcement of the general election that took place on the 4th of July, all civil servants and organisations have been required to follow Cabinet Office general election guidance. A key principle of the guidance is that we must not assume that any incoming government of any political party will take the same approach as the previous government in terms of policy and its implementation. Central MHRA regulatory functions and services have been continuing as normal through this period, and on advice of the Department of Health and Social Care, we decided along with other agencies to continue to hold the board meeting today, but without the live stream. So today's meeting will be recorded and the recording will be published in the usual way, and for our next meeting on September the 17th, we will return to our normal way of delivering public board. Please do register to observe that meeting. Registration for details will be published on our website ahead of this date. And with introductions in mind, I'd like to go around the room and ask my colleagues on the board to introduce themselves. June.
Good morning, I'm June Rain and I'm the CEO at the MHRA.
I'm Natalie Richards, I'm the head of the Executive Office at the MHRA.
Catherine Glover, Deputy Director for Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health and Social Care.
Paul Goldsmith, Non-Executive Director.
Julian Beach, Interim Executive Director for Healthcare Quality and Access.
Mercy Jersing, Non-Executive Director.
Wales Chief Partnerships Officer. Hader Hussain, Non-Executive Director.
Rose Braithwaite, Chief Finance Officer.
Liz Booth, Chief People Officer.
Claire Harrison, Chief Digital and Technology Officer.
Morning, Mandy Calvert, Non-Exec Director and Interim Co-Chair.
Morning, Alison Cave, Chief Safety Officer.
Good morning, Michael Whitehouse, Non-Executive Director and Co-Interim Chair.
Good morning, Laura Squire, Chief Officer leading MedTech Regulatory Reform.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Bosworth, Director of Communications and Engagement.
Good morning, Carly McGurry, Director of Governance, MHRA.
And I should say that we'll be joined by Raj Long, Non-Executive Director, for part of this meeting, and Dr. Junaid Bajwa shortly. And we will have one or two people visiting for particular items during the morning. In terms of apologies, Nicola Rose has given her apologies for today. I don't think there are other apologies to my knowledge. No, thank you. So turn to the declarations of interest for July 24. I think, are there any new declarations of interest people would like to raise at this meeting? If not, then I think there are no conflicts that require people to leave for any items on the agenda today. And we can move to the minutes of the meeting held in public on the 21st of May. Do I have any comments or questions on those minutes? Looking around the room, I don't think there's anything in there. I think we've picked up the actions that have been put there. There was one that I just wanted, I think they're all on the agenda today in relation to the blood inquiry. Options on the website we'll discuss, and the rest I think are on the action tracker. Okay, so if we're happy, we'll accept those minutes as an accurate record. Just moving to the actions from board. Again, I think a lot of these actions are on the agenda. I thought there were just one or two I just wanted to flag. So 101 is still attributed to Mark Bailey, so I think that needs to move to Nicola. And it was down as a item for board for today's date, so I think that probably needs to be moved, and we might come back to discuss when to. I think 108 looks like, I think Alison, it's down as to provide an update on TRE, and I guess that's covered in the item on the data strategy, or is that a separate?
Sorry, Chair, no, that's a different item. I can bring that to September if you wish.
Okay, we can discuss. And there were a couple of items dated as May, 118, 119. So I don't know if those are probably ones that we want to come back. Liz?
118 is complete. 119, I've reviewed the paper on that, so I'll be with the board next time. And 120, my colleague Carly has kindly taken.
That's on the agenda. Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you for that. Great. Okay, and I think in that we'll move on. June, for your update. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. And clearly the last month has been a little different, as you've explained, with PERDA guidelines in place. But nonetheless, there are some important deliverables. And while it's a long report, it would be good just to highlight some of the aspects. And in particular, our relentless focus on streamlined, safe access to medicines and medical devices for the benefit of patients and for the NHS. And our product lifecycle approach continues to show its benefits. So if we go upstream to the science, research and innovation, I think we can immediately see from the report that Nicola has helpfully compiled that the scientific activities that we undertake at our scientific campus really are important underpinning regulatory decisions down the line. So as well as these exciting new grant-funded initiatives, antimicrobial resistance and the evidence on bacteriophages that's increasingly in the public media, we're working to strengthen pandemic preparedness and the 100 Days mission goals that are right across the agency, vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics, and an important new grant from CEPI, the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness, Innovation Preparedness, for an adjuvant library. And then we've got the UK Vaccines Network funding for a centre of infectious disease reagents. So a really vibrant scientific community at our science campus, and a lot of initiatives that will help pandemic preparedness. And if we turn to enabling access, again, regulation evolves to drive access. We've got a number of highly personalised therapies coming through under development for cancer and for very rare diseases. And our one agency leadership group focused on this at our last meeting, actually in this room, that will look at matching a patient's individual genetic profile with the treatment. And this is going to give us real regulatory challenges, whether we're going to regulate these platforms as opposed to individual products. But they're challenges that we really do relish. It's important that we highlight the huge effort that continues to get our activities back into those efficient statutory timelines with the support, I know, of our sponsor. And we are not letting up, even though last month saw actually being ahead of a deadline we'd given ourselves, 500 outstanding established medicines applications at the end of June. So excellent progress. We need to manage the risks going forward and ensure that we have the right resource and the right strategy to meet that efficiency. Strengthening safety, if you give me a minute more, still is at the front of mind as our top priority. And colleagues will have seen there's one area which is anti-epileptic medicines that stay very much in focus, with new risk management measures for the anti-seizure and migraine treatment topiramate. So a well-coordinated initiative to make sure that people on that medicine are in no doubt about how their risks should be managed. So I think our team, together with comms, safety and surveillance, has really made that very clear to everyone. And finally, what I would say, that all this work requires a safe environment for our staff, and that is a clear priority ever since we've had an improvement notice from the Health and Safety Executive. And I'd like to assure the board that by the end of June, in fact ahead of the date, 20th of June, our response went back to the Health and Safety Executive, while the Executive team is overseeing the work that needs to be done prior to that responsibility being a board subgroup by December. So I hope I've laid out a few things that will start colleagues' inquiries and questions. We are on track with the deadlines we've set to eliminate the backlogs, restore meeting statutory timelines, work to deliver streamlined access through whichever means, including international recognition. But our commitment, of course, is to safety. And our thanks, I think, should go to the staff who make all this possible, who've worked really hard, even throughout this pre-election period. So thank you, Chair, and I'm really happy to take questions, observations and comments.
Thank you, June. And as you say, it's clear that the pace hasn't let up. So lots that we can dig into. Any comments or questions? Mercy.
It's just a comment, really, on the CPRD ethnicity records uptake. That's really good that we're doing this, and want to emphasise the importance of actually having diversity of input and tracking things like ethnicity in research, because it just improves, outcomes for everybody, really. So I hadn't quite realised we were doing this, but it's really good that it's being done, and having so many research studies asking for it. How do we encourage it, do you think?
Alison, is that a question for you?
Yes, I think it's one of the algorithms that's available through CPRD, and as we note in the paper, it is actually now the most requested algorithm-derived data. So there's a number of things that CPRD do in order to support to support their users, and this is one of the algorithms that's provided.
And I guess, is there more that we can do to make people aware of this in terms of?
I think it's through the users. I think there is awareness. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure what else you're referring to.
Yeah, I think there is a general push we need to do in research, really, about having kind of the diversity of participants and things, so that we know there's more confidence in the results that we get from research. So I think just in the greater kind of not just CPRD, obviously this is a great service that we're offering, but it's actually kind of raising that profile amongst all kind of, in clinical trials and other places. So, that end-to-end stuff would be quite good as well.
June, do you want to comment?
Well, certainly, and I think it's that end-to-end look across all our activities that we're working on at the moment. Would like to bring a paper on this. To the point on clinical trials, there's some quite good links that have been made, including with researchers not so far from here, actually, who have the richness of diversity, particularly in doing trials in London and regions near the centre, where we've actually been able to measure at least 25% of the demographic that takes up the chance to participate in a trial is from those of an ethnicity and diversity background. So we'll work with the team to bring that overview of the end-to-end, and I'm sure that there is an opportunity on the back of Margaret Whitehead's report to make sure this applies to medical devices work, not just medicines and vaccines, very much of the moment.
I mean, the question that followed for me from this was about representativeness. So do we have a measure of how representative CPRD is of our population as a whole?
Yes, and it is representative, is one of the things that we're very proud of, because of our efforts with the CPRD database to make sure that every region is represented in the database, so every region has at least 10. There is at least 10% of every region in the UK represented in the CPRD database.
And in terms of ethnic diversity, are we representing?
Absolutely,
yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
It's representative of the UK population according to census data.
Great. I mean, I think, as you say, there's an increasing recognition of the importance scientifically of doing this as well as everything else. So.
And it's both geographic
yeah.
as well as other measures of that we need to be aware of, socioeconomic status and other aspects.
Yeah.
We've just started to bring together a database of review of all the trials that we have ever looked at, 4,600, and are able to deduce how representative they have been. And it would be another chance, perhaps at a seminar, to bring that forward. I'm not aware of any other regulator that has similarly looked and asked these questions of a really good body of data. That will be our baseline, and then we can track progress. I'm particularly concerned about clinical trials. I think, as Alison has reassured, our observational data is really good on this, but I think many trials still could do a lot better.
Okay. Any other comments on the CPRD? Otherwise, yeah, no, go ahead. With the microphone.
Thank you. Just continuing the theme of patient safety, I was really pleased to note that the second phase of Safety Connect went live. I was just wondering how we collect feedback on that system and how we use that to continuously improve.
And this would be feedback from outside?
From
or
users,
yeah.
essentially. Or
So this is launched just very recently, so it's still in what we call hypercare. So we're doing lots of user testing and checking through this next period. So obviously lots of opportunities for manufacturers to feedback, but also through the staff as they become more familiar with this new technological platform. So yes, we're gathering feedback continuously.
And any lessons from that?
Not to date. No, it's been a very successful rollout of the recent update. So, yeah, no, to date it's all going smoothly, and I just want to congratulate the team actually, because there's been a huge amount of work and effort put into this. This is quite a substantial new development. As you can see, 12.5 million cases were brought across into the new platform. So a considerable advance in our abilities.
Can I just add, it certainly meets Baroness Cumberledge's request that we should overhaul. But I think the significant achievement, just to add to Alison's words, is that it's med tech, it's medical devices, as well as medicines, diagnostics, blood components, etc. And our internal staff have been amazing to actually grapple with that new world, and particularly staff who deal with medical device events. So I think it is a time of hypercare, but everybody's contributing to make this the best it can be.
Okay. Paul.
First, just sort of briefly on CPRD diversity, which is so important, and an additional measure which I think is important to include, and I think we probably do indirectly, is sort of the concept of the patient activation measure, which is widely used throughout the world, the sort of locus of control of a patient. It's a 1 to 10 score. So how able somebody is to look after themselves, be proactive, and it makes enormous difference to health outcomes. And the reason I suspect we probably do indirectly incorporate it is because it correlates quite well with measures of general deprivation.
So just help me understand that, Paul. So that's a variable that we should be capturing.
Yeah, so it's a 1 to 10 score. It's used by academics throughout the world to look at sort of locus of control. Would you proactively seek out information? Would you take on advice and make changes?
This is something a patient would self-report into the record, or their carer would report, or we derive from data, or how do we get that?
So it's primarily used by academics to identify the characteristics of a particular population study and correlate with various outcomes. There's not an immediate way of incorporating it, but I think it's a concept, something for us to look into. But actually, the point I was going to make was a sort of a separate one in a different part of your report, June, and sort of very encouraged to see more coming through in our collaborations with FDA and Health Canada. And I'm just sort of wondering, how could we expand that?
I think the short civil service type answer is step by step. We've certainly focused on stringent regulators in the work that we do, and it builds on actually a very solid foundation. It may not have been above the radar recently, but these international links have been built over a long time, and which is why we're able to, perhaps you might say, punch above our weight in fora like IMDRF and ICH, the International Council on Harmonisation, the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum. So we're building on a solid foundation, and I do think that, if I can say through Chair, our Chief Partnerships Officer would probably like to say what the vision is. We've been very much focused on ensuring our internal UK healthcare family relationships work well, right across health technology and the NHS and our devolved administration colleagues. But I think it's probably coming soon that we need to do exactly what you're suggesting and look to see where our international relationships really can take us to after that very successful visit from the FDA in February, which is still actually being talked about as a platform, particularly for evidence generation and our supply security. So perhaps we go beyond talking about MOUs to actually what the impact is in areas like evidence generation, supply chain security, misinformation, as we introduce new vaccines like the RSV vaccine this autumn. I've said a lot to give the platform.
Go to Glenn and then back to Paul for thoughts.
June's absolutely right. So we focus very much on how do you build the ecosystem in the UK. Now we kind of understand what that looks and feels like. The plan would be to push out internationally, not to do everything with everybody. I think that's to be clear. So we need to know where the bilaterals and sometimes trilaterals will be, but focus very much on an agreement, a collaboration to deliver our operational functions. So there's been a lot of international fora getting our place back at the table. IMDRF, as June mentioned, there's ICMA as well, ICH. But now we need to say how do we work with them to improve what we do and indeed what they do. So much more functional, purposeful partnerships. But as I said, it's probably going to be bilaterals and possibly trilaterals, because if you try and do it with everyone, you'll stall quickly because you'll never get agreement. But that's the focus of my international team. They'll be bringing a paper to Exco in September, and we have a 12-month plan to go from there.
Paul?
I'm very encouraged by that, and I agree with you, June, that this takes time, building relationships, and I just encourage us to be thoughtful and have an active continuing plan, because it doesn't just happen.
Yes, and if I can colleagues who are listening who think, well, perhaps our focus on getting our performance right should take the foot off the accelerator in this area. But I'd like to highlight that we do have grant funding, including from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in areas like medicines used in pregnancy that have really delivered progress, and in that case results in international agreements about how we deal with drugs that might be used in pregnancy. And it's just one example of what Glenn is saying, that there are really functional outcomes rather than things that look nice when you sign an agreement.
Mandy?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think what we're seeing is actually having an impact on medicine supply as well, and I think beginning to measure the effectiveness of the collaborations, both in terms of how it enables us to get medicines to patients more quickly, but also in terms of innovative shared guidance, is also going to help industry and make the UK an attractive place to be. So I think if we can bring those measures as well, which I know are a little bit subjective, I think that would be quite powerful. Because I think that collaboration, I think there's some really good examples in the papers from your department, from HQ&A devices. So it's really across the board, and I think we can coalesce that. So well done to the teams.
Okay, and a lot of support for more of that. Any other questions? Maybe could I pick up the question about, I think there's something about the personalised medicines platform here which I thought was interesting. Can I just sort of ask about how we deliver that and whether we have the resources, and particularly human resources, we want to deliver that, and how we're seeing that happening?
I think the first point about it is to start with the science, and that is exactly where we, I think, are really able, together with the Commission on Human Medicines Expert Working Group, to delve into what that means in terms of how regulation should evolve. And on the ground, and I might like to ask you to bring in Julian here, we've actually created a post for someone who looks strategically at the evolution of regulation, and that will include working with colleagues across the organisation, delivering proposals that will be tested particularly in the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities. So in that regard, there is a meeting which is an international convention in September where our staff will be leading the discussions. And just to finish, when we had our senior leadership group look at this 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was very clear that there are a finite list of questions that the regulators need to ask and answer. And if we can answer those in an international forum, I think that will help the industry, and of course it will help patients. So it's all underway. We've got the people on the case, and I think the exciting part is that these decisions are moving, and we will have a consultation, as we said in the report, hopefully in September, depending on the outcomes of these international meetings, that puts out to the community how this will work in practice. Everything from the trials through to point of care manufacture, assuring safety for patients and that the NHS can actually deliver. As we know, reading the newspapers, there's trials ongoing even in London here on bowel cancer. So we've got to move with speed, with pace, and get those regulatory decisions made in a harmonised fashion.
Thanks. Julian, did you want to add?
No, thank you. Absolutely, as June has said, so that we are looking at this with very much increased focus, with a view that we have a clear plan which has been discussed and agreed at EXCO in terms of providing some period of further data collection for some of the technical questions to ensure that we get the right outcome. The questions which June rightly refers to are critical to answer, and that's where we can really be clear with those meetings that are happening over the summer period to come up with a proposal for particularly personalised immunotherapies, but then take it further through into rare diseases. But the post that we've created is very much looking more broadly across national licences with the established, innovative, right the way across the piece, and working with a team across the agency. It's not just healthcare quality and access, it's each of the areas of the agency are contributing to that work. And to your question about resources, it's so critical. We need to make the resources, and people are engaging with that to make sure that we are delivering in those key areas.
Great. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Raj. I introduced you off camera, so you can just reintroduce yourself. And then.
Raj Long, Non-Executive Director on the board. On the topic of personalised medicines, I think June is absolutely right. There is, I think, across globally, many of the SRA agencies, the FDA, are grappling with this issue because it's evolving, the goalpost is moving, but they do want to land in that space for all of the value that we're aware of. So I think it's great, June, that we're part of that international discussion. I wonder if there's an opportunity to do a little bit in addition to it, a bit more strategic in the sense that there are multiple components coming up within that big umbrella. One is gene therapy. So the FDA, as you know, for unmet areas are totally involved in having a stream, and it's being really worked on. They had a major meeting a couple of months ago in Oman, bringing in different players together. The other evolving piece is biomarkers. So if we want to connect the dots here, it might be worthwhile for us to just do a bit of a scan, figure out which other disease, which areas, because personalized medicine is so wide in terms of what you're targeting. I wonder if it makes sense to just do a little bit of a scan, figure out, is it oncology? Like oncology would be a fantastic area in the context of the investments going on in the UK. And try and connect the dots and see where are the biomarkers for a specific area being developed, reach out, make that partnership so you're early in the discussion, and then connect that with also investments in the UK, because that way you've already got the support. So I'm thinking the Dementia Mission, for example, lots of money in there, and personalized medicine there is really something that would work immensely positively if we find something. And then connect the dots. So we are partnering at the global umbrella, right? So this is the big international meeting that you're talking about. But then in addition, we pick a few nuggets and partner individually as well. And at some point, those two are likely to come together if it works out. And so you're taking a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. If any one of those wins, the agency will be a winner. So just a thought there.
Jane, to come back?
Yeah, quickly, to just develop that a little bit further, as we finalise our science strategy, and Nicola's conducting workshops, but also looking to get a connection better into the external world, and is on the research and development group of the Dementia Mission. I think it's important to highlight that we do have a lot of expertise in the research into the cancer biomarkers, and I think that's definitely an area we will want to do more on, and particularly now that the diagnostics element of our medtech reform is coming to the fore. let's build those connections, but as we said just now, make them very purposeful and outcome focused. We have connections into our future health, which is absolutely going to have to tackle the question of, you know, the societal change to understanding our own risks, but having the diagnostics available. And we know that there's been some bottlenecks about getting diagnostics through. We're absolutely ready to get the science through to the delivery. And I think this is something that will be a key feature for the business plan next year.
Jim?
It was just to add a small part to that, was that we do totally take that point, and we are partnering and looking to make sure that we are focusing on specific areas, but that we are looking also to have a framework so that regardless of the technology type, then we can look at how we focus in those particular areas. But we have individual meetings with various organisations over the next months to actually drive that, so that we can answer the broad questions, but focus and partner specifically.
Alison.
Yeah, and I'd just like to sort of highlight that personalised medicine can also be on risk as well, on safety. And so we do the yellow card. We have a couple of pilots on the yellow card biobank to understand how we can identify markers of risks, as in pharmacogenomic markers of risk, which could allow us to do more targeted risk minimisation, but also support and reduce the ADRs that we know still remain a big factor in our population. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, no, that's a helpful discussion, and I think we'll revisit this when Nicola will be here. I guess for September we can discuss further. Any other questions? If not, there's one last one from me, which is just about international recognition. So, just interested to know about the volumes coming through, whether these are in line with what we expected or not, based on what we've got here.
I think the bedding in period has probably been a little longer than we anticipated from all the pipeline work that colleagues in HQA have done. And I would suggest that it is lower in terms of volume. Obviously, if there's been an uptick, Julian's the best placed person to say what that looks like. But I think it helps us with the volume planning for next year to know that after the first 6 months of the year, it isn't taking over our work. It will be a part of our work, but not more than the 50% that we said.
Yeah, and we always had that discussion about the right balance, didn't we? Julian, where do you see this?
I mean, I think it's a continuing discussion in terms of the proportions. We're not seeing a drop-off in national licences per se. We are seeing the IRP licence requests coming in at about the similar levels as we've seen previously. The US and other potential reference regulators, we have got active discussions on those and coming through, and we are resolving some of the questions to enable those to come through. So, for example, the KPIs that will be published on the website this month continue to show 100% delivery against targeted timeline. So the performance of the review and in terms of how we are achieving those things coming through is very much tracking to where we want it to be and where we predicted it to be. The outlook of pipelines still remains that we do see some companies potentially coming to use that who have not been potentially involved in the UK, and so that's something that we are actively tracking as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Great, well, thank you, June. As always, a fantastic summary of what's going on. So I think we'll move on if that's all right, and just move over to Rose for financial and people performance update. Thanks.
Thanks, Graham. The management report for the second month of this financial year shows a small surplus of £1.2 million compared to budget. This is mostly caused by underspends on both pay and non-pay costs. I would say the non-pay underspend is most likely to be a timing issue. Some quite big contracts have been delayed into future months. But we are also 3%, so £0.5 million worth behind our income year-to-date budget. So that's the position as we finish the second month of the year. As you realise, we've now just finished the third month of the year, so we are doing a deep dive into the end of June figures, which will give us a full quarter worth of data and allow us to consider whether we should adjust budgets if we are in a surplus position. So that will give, next time I report to the board, I'll be able to give you a far more robust feel for how we're doing in terms of the first quarter worth of data. In the HR data, we have provided extra information on starters and leavers following the board's request last month, which gives you a better breakdown of starters and leavers by grade to get a better feel for the flow of people through the organisation. Happy to answer any questions.
Michael.
Rose, thank you very much for this. It's very clear, and I commend the control you've got for, we're only 2 months into the financial year, and it's good that you've got this strong financial control. Can I ask a question, an inevitable question about capital? And, we are dependent on the department to give us capital money, and we were fortunate to get 25.5 million. Half of that, I think, more of it is for Regulatory Connect. And I see that we are underspending. I know you're profiled to catch up, but if you align this to the report by Mandy from the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee, we've still got some way to go in doing system redesign, which will underpin stage 2 of Regulatory Connect. So I expect my question is, how confident are we around this profile? And the other thing I'd say is there other things that we need to do to mitigate the risk of not fully utilising this money? Because given the current financial position, we can't be confident that we will get this in years to come. So it's really it's risk mitigation. Are we focusing sufficiently on mitigating the risks? Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. A very good question. We are doing a lot of work at the moment with the programme on profiling the cost and how much it will cost to deliver the products that they intend to deliver this year. So we're doing a deep dive with them on how robust their forecasts are, because I agree, I am concerned around this myself. But I do believe that we will spend that money in order to deliver the quite significant amount that we need to deliver this year on Regulatory Connect.
Michael, you happy? Yep. Did you want to come back, or you?
No, I just think, to help you, you'll know historically organisations say they'll spend and then they don't, and it's really to keep that in the eye of this board that we get regular assurance. If I may ask one other question, I noticed that on HQA we're not spending the subcontracted money, and I just wondered how you square that with performance, where we know we've got a backlog. And it just seemed to me that I thought the strategy was, for low risk, we would contract in resource or we would use outsource to manage that profile.
So there have been slight delays on getting those contracts in place, but there are now people in place. Okay. So the money is flowing out in the third month of the year. I don't know if Julian wants to add anything more to that.
No, so we have been working through to increase the number of contract and professional service contracts that we have, and that has been slightly delayed because of the negotiations to bring those contracts and identify the people to do the work. So ultimately,
you have got the resource.
So we are bringing that on board now, so that those have been going through with 5 companies, okay. And we expect that spend to reach a predicted level. We are now working to provide a framework contract so that we can have that as a competitive long-term tender to take it out of the rapid turnaround we needed to get the contracts up and going relatively quickly.
Thank you. And thanks, Rose. Thank you.
That's helpful. Junaid, did you?
Oh, sorry.
That's right. No, so I think Julian may have partly answered it, but just to maybe go a little bit deeper on starters, leavers and vacancies, it was related to just the number of vacancies we still have within HQA and also the volume of work coming in. And I just wondered, is there anything more that we can do to address both the vacancy rate and then also the contracted worker? But I think, Julian, you probably answered what we're doing now. I don't know if there's anything more that we can do. I'm just trying to match supply and demand for the work that we have.
Yep, so what we have put in place in the 2024-5 budget is an increase in headcount, so that you'll see an increase in vacancies, not because of that we've had more leavers, but because we are looking to resource and right-size the organisation. The numbers that we are recruiting for currently, that process is protracted and quite lengthy, so that we are working with HR to ensure that we have that moving forward. So we have a dedicated HR person to help with that recruitment, but it is also looking to try to find the right people to do these roles. And we are seeing that as somewhat challenging, but we're keeping focus, so that we've changed the recruitment approach, such as we've put an evergreen advert out for quality assessors. We are looking within, particularly in the bile space, currently to recruit both medics and quality assessors, and those things form the basis of the vacancies that you see. We will then have the ongoing training. The professional services and other parts are outside of the numbers reported in that section of this report.
Okay. Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, and again on the starters and leavers, which it's a useful table to try and get a feel for things. Although, because the denominator's missing, it's harder to judge, and also with it just being such a short period, thinking about the trends. And the other question that then arose in my mind is, do we do exit interviews? And if so, what sort of themes come out?
Is that for Liz?
Yes, we do exit interviews. Themes are the typical themes. Does vary somewhat by type of employee, but colleagues are attracted by promotion opportunities, as they normally are. So mainly it's pull factors rather than push factors. Do look at those regularly, fairly obviously, to make sure that we are addressing those through our staff, our people survey action plan, if there are any matters that are push factors.
And anything that would be assisted by sort of board discussion, or that sort of arise through exit, sort of think actually there are things that we need to do to try and make an organisation more attractive?
There are a number of things that we're doing at the moment to make the organisation more attractive around our employer brand, around the way we recruit people, around most particularly reaching out to people through LinkedIn rather than simply relying on the more traditional recruitment tools. But also, one of the main attractions of working for the MHRA, which I think we sometimes forget, is the brilliant work we do and the reputation of the agency. So in promoting that rather better through our employer brand is something that I think will be attractive. You'll understand that as civil servants we have some restrictions on the way we can do things, rightly part of the civil service rules. So we need to work within those, particularly around pay, but we are looking at what levers of power we can use to enhance the employment proposition for colleagues, particularly our technical staff that Julian's team rely on so greatly.
I think if I understood the question, I mean, I think we're seeing a pattern of net recruitment, which is great, and I think this sort of breaks it down across there, and clearly it's great that people find it an attractive place to work still. I think if I understood the question, it was about whether there's learnings from exit interviews about those who are leaving, whether we have a sight of that at the board, that whether that's something that would be helpful for us to have a way of understanding a bit, because there may be lessons for us that we need to be hearing there.
Yeah, I mean, happy to bring that to the board or perhaps to the committee.
Yeah,
committee.
I mean, have a think about where you think it's best, but I think it would be useful to surface that, I think, if that's what I understood to be.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? No? Well, if not, thank you, Rose. That was very clear and very helpful. Thank you. Are you introducing the next?
Yes.
So we'll move on. So the question for the next is around the annual report and accounts and how well they reflect the governance and financial results of the MHRA over the last year. So we're joined by Sarah Gilbert for this. Welcome, Sarah. Carly, for you to introduce.
Yes, so a little bit of a two-part, apologies, two-part item. Sarah and I can speak to the annual report, and then I know Rose will speak to the accounts. If I can just circulate these copies. What colleagues have had is the substantive report. This is just an illustration of what the final designed version will look like when we seek to lay in Parliament. Sarah, do you want to add detail to that?
Yes, thank you. So the annual report has been largely agreed now with narrative. There's a couple of sort of wordsmithing type sort of paragraphing that we're going to be doing with the designed version. But the version you've received as PDF is the narrative now to be approved and signed off. And this is just the designed version for you to see the kind of pictures we're going for with the designers.
So that's to make sure that we make the report as helpful and usable as possible for its main intended audiences, which will be parliamentarians and the public, as well, of course, as all of our stakeholders. So we have told the story of the performance of the agency for this year, successes, challenges, the audit opinion, and the work that we have lined up on all of those core services for the coming year. So on that element, we are seeking board's support for the accounting officer to sign, but that's probably the right point for me to hand over to Rose on the accounts.
Thanks.
So maybe June first, and then
I just want to say on the successes and a year in numbers, etc. We're looking, following discussion at the executive team, to get a 4-pager that will really set things out in a readable fashion. I'm not saying this isn't readable, but for those that are a bit time poor and want to know some of the numbers, some of the successes, where we have had a very productive year, despite, as Carly has said, the focus on relentlessly improving our performance. And I hope that members would be happy to have a look at this once it's pulled together. The focus today is actually getting to what you've just seen, but I think that might not even be 4 pages, or it might be a bit more, who knows, but something that is, you know, a half-hour read, something to talk about in teams, and something to feel proud about. The staff who are saying, as Liz has just said, how pleased they are to spend at least part of their career delivering for the public, for patients and for the NHS. And I think that's on the stocks with Sarah and colleagues, but it will come through, and I hope will be something that we can all look at and be proud of.
That'd be very helpful. I mean, there's so much that is going on that we need to be celebrating. If you could circulate that, would be great. Before Rose comes in, Michael, do you want to just...
Yeah, I just want to say to colleagues, an important requirement of the annual report is that it does include a governance statement, and it gives an accurate representation of the agency's performance over the last 12 months, both its successes and where it needs to do more. So the draft has been reviewed by ARAC, and just to say a number of positive things, the governance statement, talking with external audit who's seen many of these, is a very strong document. I think it's the best we've seen as an organisation. It's finely balanced. It identifies a lot of positive things, but is very open and transparent about the things that we need to do more. So I think the board can take assurance from that the document is a fair representation of the organisation's performance over the last years. And as non-executive members of this board, as well as the executive, we have a responsibility for ensuring that that is the case. So I'm giving that necessary assurance.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Rose.
Yes, just to say the accounts in this annual report and accounts have gone through audit, and they are just finishing their audit, and I know Michael will come to that point because it has gone to the audit committee. But one thing has come up since these accounts have been prepared. We have a tax issue which has come to light at the last minute, and we are going to need to adjust the accounts to provide for some additional expenditure relating to that tax issue of around up to £6.7 million. So we are going to have to adjust the accounts and work through with audit to make sure it's a fully representative set of accounts for this last financial year.
Great, thank you. Michael, do you want to pick up on that?
So building on what Rose has said, firstly, a number of points to make. So I've been, with my audit committee colleagues, been closely involved with the NAO and the KPMG, who are subcontracted by NAO to do the majority of the audit work. The feedback that I've had from them independently is that the audit has gone very well. For those who are interested, there were no real material errors that arose, which is very unusual. So all credit to the finance team and everybody involved in that process. I was very pleased to hear that. The issue that has arisen, I would say, talking with the external auditors, is not unusual. I think other public sector organisations have faced this. The team are working through the data at the moment. Ideally, Rose had hoped that today the board could formally approve the financial statements for signature by June in her role as accounting officer, and then subsequently ensuring that they are laid in Parliament as is required under statute. I think where we are at the moment is the accounts are what I would say 99% there. And Chair, what I would suggest, rather than necessarily have to reconvene a board, I would suggest that members could ask any questions that they want to ask of Rose and I on the face of the accounts today, but that you delegate to me responsibility to work with Rose to ensure that these final elements are resolved. If anything significant were to arise from over the next few days, I would obviously bring that to your and my other co-chair attention, and we would reconvene the board. But I'm not anticipating that, and I think that would be the best way to work forward if you're in agreement.
Thank you. That sounds like a very helpful suggestion. Rose, do you want to comment on that?
I would appreciate that as a sensible way forward, because we do hope to resolve this quite quickly, depending on the auditor's ability to support us on that.
So should we just take Michael's invitation for questions or comments on the paper in front of us? I mean, if there are none, then Michael, thank you for that offer, and I think we'll accept that. And if you can take that delegated authority, come back to us if you think there are unresolved issues. So in terms of the overall report and approval with that caveat, then I think we're happy for that to be approved. Is there anything else you need from us at this point?
No, I don't think so. Thank you to Sarah and the team and everybody who has contributed. It's a mammoth task pulling this together and accurately reflecting the work of the agency. So pleased we've got it to a good place.
Yeah, and just to echo that in terms of the work that's gone in from the team, particularly Rose's team, thank you for everybody for getting things as far as you did so quickly. Great. Okay, Sarah, sorry, anything else you wanted to add? Sorry, thank you for coming. Sorry. Let's move on then. That's great. So, Alison, I think the next is with you. This sort of follows from our discussion a couple of boards ago about how the MHRA would respond to recommendations from the infected blood inquiry. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as board members are aware, the infected blood inquiry reported recently following an extensive and comprehensive review, which was launched actually in July 2017, so 7 years ago. The report sets out and details its findings and is obviously available on the inquiry website. Reading the report, it says one of the most striking aspects of the evidence is the failure to listen to patients and hear what they wanted, rather than assume the listener already knew. And that's very relevant for the recommendation which sits with us at MHRA. And the principle is that steps should be taken to give greater prominence to the online yellow card scheme to those receiving either blood components or biological products, or who are being transfused with blood components. So they're either receiving biological products or being transfused with blood components. So the paper presents to board a number of recommendations, a number of steps to support better training of healthcare professionals in collaboration with SHOT, which is the Serious Hazards of Transfusion team, who we collaborate with regularly on haemovigilance activities across the UK. How best to guide patients as to the appropriate route to report any concerns, as well as more generally how we can raise awareness of the yellow card scheme. And we're obviously in the context of the 60th anniversary this year. So I won't expand, it's all in the paper. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Andy?
Thanks, Alison, for that. I think this really highlighted perhaps the complexity there is for patients and healthcare professionals. And I wanted to understand what our role is in how we simplify that and maybe bringing those different platforms together so you've got all of the data, even if it comes from different places. Or if we weren't to do it, who was?
Yeah, Alison, difficult question, but
So-
key question.
So it is actually a very complex haemovigilance picture.
Yeah.
But basically, we do run the SABRE platform, which is Serious Adverse Blood Reactions, and that is on our website. And healthcare professionals report any concerns through that website. We also accept, obviously, reports through the yellow card scheme. But I think it is a confusing picture, and this is why the recommendation is to put some guidance on our website to inform patients where they should be best reporting any concerns that they might have. So whether it's a transfusion reaction and where should they report that to the healthcare professional would be our recommendation, or whether it's a reaction to a blood product as such, which is treated as medicine and then would be reported through the yellow card scheme. But to actually, one of the key recommendations is to put better guidance on our platform to enable that.
Do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I was just thinking, and I appreciate that, and that's a very logical approach, is can we do anything more, either with technology or a one-stop shop, which would obviously take longer, but being that sort of patient and centric, is that something we need to look at in the future? And
me,
obviously we need resources.
I mean, for me, it sounds like there's two bits here. I think there's something about how we communicate this complexity, not just to patients, I mean, to the providers as well. It is very complex. And I don't know whether within what the resources are on our website, we'll talk about the website separately, but whether there's something we can do to help people navigate this, particularly patients, but not just patients. But then I think separately, Mandy's talking about something slightly broader, which is about our role in the system and whether we should be trying to do more than we're asked. I mean, clearly this is a great response to what we've been asked to do. Is there something more we should be thinking about where we can lead in this in terms of making the system more straightforward or not?
I think there is an opportunity, and Alison clearly was closely involved in some of the discussions that the inquiry heard and are now on the record. Absolutely, as Alison is saying, we should get the guidance as soon as we can so that there's not a long period to wait before we meet the recommendation that's in our direction. The history in Yellow Card, is obviously we're looking back over a long time now, tells us that if you have a plurality of reporting modes, it is complex around product, around the type of population. We've been through a different card for HIV products, for example, when there was a concern about confidentiality. And the story of plurality is that people don't, in the end, if you talk with particular therapeutic areas that have medicines and medical devices like gynecology or ophthalmology, if they don't know what a product is, there's no report. So I think 3 systems for one sector is complex, and I'd like to take away the thinking with Alison and see what we can look at. I think the inquiry, having spent so long to get to where they've got to, and the fact that we now have commitments to deliver through the statute, we should take this opportunity. SHOT, SABRE, yellow card. Let's test ourselves when we try and explain it simply from the patient perspective, from the health professional perspective. And the whole thing as we move to real-time vigilance is the need for speed. I don't think anyone would say that the yellow card would have prevented what happened. But now we need to look forward and make sure not just the signal detection, but the systems behind it actually deliver quickly if there's a new infection that could be transmitted by blood.
Yeah, Paul and then Sinead.
Similarly, sort of very supportive and excellent proposals and programme. I mean, from the hospital side, so having sort of been involved for 30 years, thank goodness I've seen a lot of improvement. So I think there can be some general reassurance that we're in a much, much better situation. one of the things that really highlights to me, though, and this comes back to sort of broader discussions we've had previously across all drugs and devices, is how we can assist both healthcare professionals and patients to make informed decisions. And it's really difficult, and there'll be an understandable fear from patients, and maybe patients not taking blood transfusions when they really need them. So it's sort of thinking, how can we best communicate to both patients, us and all of the other actors involved? And I think that's one of the challenges, June, that there are a number of other organisations involved, and particularly other healthcare professionals, because it will be the haematology specialist nurses, the physician associates who are doing some of the consent and the discussions, and how do we, with a broader system, ensure that this occurs correctly?
Work with the clinical community very closely to support that community, and we, of course, as the competent authority, we're responsible for the inspections of the blood establishments as well. So there's a lot that we can maybe make more visible, so that patients are more reassured around what the systems are in place to ensure the safety of blood transfusions and the use of blood components, which, as you highlight, has is completely different with the introduction of the BSQRs to the situation back in the 1970s and 1980s. But you're right, with this obviously, with the release of the inquiry, it's really important that we reassure patients around that.
There was a hand. Oh, was Raj? Oh, sorry. I thought Raj was going to ask a question. Junaid.
So I welcome the approach. It begs the question, and maybe it's something to think about as we think about reducing the complexity, is we're being reactive at this stage, but are there other issues that we might wish to consider where we have similar levels of complexity in other domains? And should we consider becoming a bit more proactive around areas in which perhaps over time we've added complexity, which increases risk and creates safety issues? But are there other areas beyond blood transfusion where we may wish to do a deeper dive and reduce complexity as well, if we're going to be looking at complexity?
And do you have any particular thoughts on that? I mean, is there anything comes to mind?
It just begs the question that we know that we have to do this now because of the inquiry, but actually, are there other things? If we would just take a step back, we would say actually there are other things that are equally complicated, which are also increasing risk. Nothing comes to mind immediately, but just begs the question.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone has an immediate thought on that or wants to reflect and come back, but it's a useful question to ask, I think. Do you want to come in, June?
I think some of these concepts came up in our compliance on inspection type of strategy, because when you have a plurality of things to be satisfied, listening to the regulated sector, they're inspected for one reason or another every day of every week. And what more value that adds could be questioned. One of the reasons that compliance and innovation are together are the complexities of good clinical practice as opposed to the regulatory oversight of clinical trials from the regulator, if I can put it that way, from the approval process. So I think we could take that as a conceptual issue to look where things can come together and be simpler. Nothing, I think, replaces the complexity of trying to apply for a clinical trial, at least as I understand it. The navigation of the regulator, the ethics, the local prescribing decisions that are made. And I think if the general thrust is to try and bring things together, look at what value is added, and simplify the road or the pathway for the investigator, the applicant, etc., that would guide us a lot. But always, I think, in areas like safety, it is the patient perspective. So I think there's some themes here we might want to, at the executive, toss around a bit in a brainstorm type way until we can see what might be the doable things. To begin with, I'm sure, as Alison says, we need to make sure we help people navigate.
Claire? Oh, sorry, Alison first.
That would be the first step, to make sure that people are navigated through the process so they understand where best they need to report whatever reaction or the concern they have, and that's what the first step will be. But very happy to think further about where else we could bring further measures in to help.
Claire?
Yeah, just following on from Junaid's point, I don't have, nothing springs to mind immediately around the what, but it does around the how. So thinking about data and technology and real-time data and reporting and signals and surveillance, and all the different data sources and so on and partners within the system. So that's not within our control, all of that. But again, in collaboration with other organisations, just thinking about how we can be more proactive with what we have and then what we need as well to identify those things more proactively and far quicker rather than reacting to something that's already happened. And I think patients are at the heart of everything, and that, but the reliance on it being reported and that sort of manual and step by step, that's really important, but also how we can support and augment that with data and technology is as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Any other, yeah, Mercy.
Just wanted to have a look at the proposals again. One of them was about the being offered in UK MSc in biomedical science, which is a really good idea. But I just wondered how that worked. I mean, how many universities kind of offer that, and how do we influence that then?
That's just one university that we work with in order to support their MSc. But one of the things we want to do, as you can see in the paper, is to create more online materials so that more people can access the sort of educational pieces that the team are already doing. So I think that will be helpful, and that could be placed on our website. So that's one route. Obviously, if more universities were to pick up this sort of activity, we have a small team, so we'd have to be careful, but we would obviously look to support where we can. And I think the online options, webinars, which can be accessed at any time, is a really good option, which we can manage within our resources.
I was just going to mention in June's report, obviously there was a link with another university that came to South Mims that looked at medical devices as well as what NIBS was doing as well. And that might be another good link because they were biomedical and medical students too. So it was a new university that we hadn't previously had links with. So that might be a good way of following that up.
So and just to highlight that we are running, we have produced a series of sort of materials, so a series of webinars that we are circulating around to medical schools, and we have engaged with a few medical schools through their patient safety weeks in order to highlight reporting for healthcare professionals more generally. And so that's one other option where we're trying to highlight the importance of reporting, but also to describe what happens to a yellow card from the point it's reported through its assessment and any regulatory action.
That's really good, and also the workshop ideas. I'd be very supportive of that. Again, yellow card. We've got a really good opportunity of raising profile because it's been around for such a long time. We've got a good anniversary coming up, so I would encourage the more that people know about it, because still, unfortunately, most people don't. When I speak to members of the general public, people don't understand yellow card. I know we are talking about websites soon, but there are opportunities as well about how people do look up reactions they might be having to medicines and stuff. So encourage that.
Great. I mean, I think on the question of medical schools, I think if it's obviously beyond the blood inquiry, but I think in terms of risk and reporting, it may be worth thinking about reaching out to the Medical Schools Council, which is the kind of convening. I would hope they would offer an audience and a way of disseminating.
Yeah, we have done that actually, okay. And look to circulate the series of presentations we already have, so they're available for people to use as and how they like through the medical education programme.
Okay. And you think that was effective?
We've done, as I said, we've done it we've done 3 universities to date, and we did get good feedback. I'm not sure yet on how the presentations have been more generally taken up through that route. We can explore that and maybe bring that
back in another day.
It goes for lots of things, but you just wonder whether this is something we should be pushing into the syllabus as a whole. And I don't know how well.
And the Patient Safety Week, which
Yeah.
most universities have, is a perfect opportunity for us to engage with the universities.
And in fact, post-qualification, the British Pharmacological Society and their cadre of clinical pharmacology specialist registrars, if that's the right term, very keen to work with us. Pre-COVID, we used to have training events for a group of specialists every year. And in fact, that is a way to ensure that the safety of medicines in all its elements is out there in hospital with the clinical pharmacology specialists, who really should be our eyes and ears, and especially with the exciting development of the Yellow Card Biobank. So it's something maybe we need an oversight of, if you like, the life cycle of the doctor, starting with the earliest medical school intake right through to specialist training and so forth, so that we've really got a grip there of the prescribers for the future.
Yeah, Mandy.
Yeah, I think the discussion has just prompted a much broader thought about our role in education, because we've clearly got some great materials, we've got some great science, are we actually got the right partnerships to disseminate that broadly? Because most of the inquiries have some element, we've seen over the past few years, some element of education and training. But we're sort of limited to some extent about how much we do and how much we resource that. But I don't know whether we need probably another discussion on that role, because it could have such a big impact on safer medicines and awareness, whether we partner with universities or something like that. It's a key service maybe we have to deliver.
Did you want to come back on that, Alison?
Well, I need to say that we are obviously working with other organisations. I've got links with the Royal College of GPs, and we've been working also to try and improve the visibility of the Yellow Card report through the different electronic healthcare systems, because we know we get different amounts of reports through different systems. So we're working in that route as well, so that people can easily access the report within their normal work streams.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like there's a moment just to think about outside the room, as you say, but a bit more about how we engage across the training life cycle, particularly as we're moving to an agency which is wanting better quality real-world data. I think the people who are coding that and capturing it, we need to engage and need to understand why that is useful and how it's going to be useful, particularly as we move to new device approaches and so forth.
Absolutely, and within our webinar set of webinar, we talk about CPRD and try and to highlight the importance of actually accurately inputting the information into even the electronic record, because we're using that to assess where we can the benefit risk of products.
Okay, well, let's come back to it when we're planning board schedules about whether we might engage on that in an afternoon.
It was just a note to say, I think we referenced some healthcare professionals, so doctors and pharmacists, but we should probably also think about nurses and other colleagues as well, in the broadest way to think about almost an omni-channel approach to how we think about this engagement.
Yeah, I think we did touch on other health providers too. Catherine, from a sort of DH system perspective, I mean, I think if we're talking about the role of MHRA convening around safety, clearly it requires a lot of engagement across the sector. Is there something more that is going on in that space around the complexity, particularly in relation to the blood products, but how that might be simplified, or what would be the role of MHRA, do you think, in trying to drive forward a systems-wide look at this?
Thank you. The department's considering carefully the infected blood inquiry report and is undertaking work with across the health family to consider its response, and MHRA is a core part of that. And I believe, June, you were at the first board recently to kickstart that work.
And just building on what Catherine has said, and it is all getting a bit of pace in it too, the various arm's length bodies, as we call ourselves, have had an initiative initially spearheaded by the Health Service Safety Investigation Board, I think it's called HSSIB. And I think it's now a good time to stock take on what that's achieved, perhaps alongside our general leadership with NHS England in some of the main safety issues that that crop up that affect healthcare to see what more we should do. So I think it's a good time. There'll be a feeling of a fresh approach, I think, in DHSC to this. So the initial HSSIB-led work, I think, is probably going to be rethought a bit.
Great. Any final comments on that? Okay. Well, look, I think that's a really great discussion. It's often the shortest papers that give the longest discussion, so thank you. I mean, I guess some key messages are, I mean, I guess first and foremost, there's a message of reassurance for the public that in terms of blood products, we are as safe, the safest we've ever been, and that the system, as it currently configured, is working well. But clearly, in terms of the awareness of the systems of safety, there's more we can do. And I think you've mentioned the yellow card. There's clearly an opportunity for us to leverage the interest in that, and there's always more we're going to be able to do to raise that into public consciousness, and I think that should be across all of what we're doing. And there's clearly a piece in some format, perhaps within our website, perhaps elsewhere, about trying to just help people navigate this complexity, but at the same time sounding like there's an appetite to think a bit beyond that and think about what our role could be. And I think there's a lot of support for what's going on in DH that the agency can contribute to in terms of that simplicity. So, well, less complexity rather than simplicity, shall I say. So I think we'll take the invitation from June and Alison to follow up between yourselves and have a think about what that looks like. And then I think perhaps that piece on education is something we should come back to at a board seminar. We could think about who we might invite in on that, whether it's the Medical Schools Council or whoever it might be. And we could take that forward. Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. Good. So shall we move on to the long-promised and eagerly anticipated data strategy? Alison and Claire.
Thanks, I'll kick off. So we would like to thank the board very much for the input into this strategy to date. We certainly hope that the revisions have incorporated any previous...
sorry to interrupt. So I should have introduced John Connolly, who is coming to the room as well.
Yeah.
From your team? Sorry, yeah. John, you just wanted to introduce yourself briefly. Sorry, I should have done that.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. John Connolly, Deputy Director for Scientific Data and Insight within the Safety and Surveillance Group.
Thanks. Sorry, Alison.
No problem. So the data strategy, which is provided to you, sets out our forward ambitions for data, and it's accompanied now by a number of key deliverables. So our fundamental driver is always to improve and support our decision-making across the product life cycle, both by enabling that earlier access we were talking about today for patients, but also supporting more proactive approaches to vigilance, so understanding the benefit risk of products on the market. Increasingly, we also believe that data will become more multimodal, and we were talking about individualised and personalised medicines earlier today, and it's critical that we have the data to understand this, but also the disease landscape, to support vigilance, but also that our staff have the skills and capacity they need in order to analyse it. We've put also additional deliverables to establish new advice processes to provide clarity for industry where new methodological approaches to real-world evidence generation are proposed. But we also recognise very much that partnerships are absolutely key in this space, and we really will seek to work across the UK healthcare data system to deliver on the strategy. This is a joint strategy between across the whole agency, very much involving colleagues in digital and technology. But maybe I'll pass to John now for a little bit more detail on the 5 pillars.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for the opportunity to present this paper today. So the data strategy aims to set out our vision for data, digital technologies and real-world evidence over the forthcoming 3 fiscal years. In developing this strategy, we have carefully considered the broader external landscape and the ecosystem of which we are part. We have purposefully aimed to make the strategy proactive and external facing, but we've also sought to differentiate this strategy to recognise our highly specialist and in some senses unique role as both a sovereign regulator and also as a hub for regulatory science and innovation. As Dr. Cave said, the strategy is built around 5 core themes, and each of those core themes is then underpinned by specific deliverables. The first of these core themes really focuses on enabling innovation in the broader ecosystem, recognising that our stakeholders developing innovative products require clarity from the regulator in terms of the methodologies they use for evidence generation. So that theme will be underpinned by a number of deliverables, but a key aspect is increasing our offering around scientific dialogue and qualification for specific aspects of data and methodologies, continuing our work on guidance, and also considering opportunities to investigate other technologies through workshops and so on. The second theme is very much around regulatory decision-making, which is a core part of the organisation. We recognise the role of real-world data and real-world evidence in ensuring that those decisions are timely, predictable, transparent, and scientifically robust. So within that theme, we'll be exploring mechanisms to increase our access and availability of real-world data, for example, through common data models and federated analytics, engaging across the broader ecosystem, for example, with device and outcome registries, and also exploring the opportunity to connect different data sets through linkage. The third theme focuses on capabilities, considering the people, skills, tools, and technologies which we require to deliver this strategy. Fundamentally recognizing that digital technologies are really a catalyst, opening up new use cases which may not previously have been available before. So, for example, in this theme, we'll be exploring opportunities through graduate placements and the apprenticeship scheme. We'll also be considering our own internal data architecture through a data maturity assessment. We'll be considering the ongoing digital transformation programs, particularly Regulatory Connect and Safety Connect, and our own other activities to productionize data through a trusted research environment for CPRD. The fourth theme focuses on synergy across the ecosystem with other partners, particularly considering how we will leverage the future network of centres of excellence in regulatory science and innovation to deliver progress, particularly in data science, to enable us to have access to the data we require for decision making. But we'll also be considering opportunities to work internationally, for example, through harmonisation bodies. And then the final theme is really about the way we use advanced analytics and AI throughout the product lifecycle to support a range of decisions across different parts of the organisation. So, for example, under that theme, we'll be seeking to convene a cross-agency task force to focus on the opportunities to safely and responsibly harness the potential of generative AI in different business areas. We'll also be considering opportunities, again linking back to theme 4, opportunities for academic partnerships, for example, to apply novel methodologies to increase the level of insight which we can derive from real-world data. So thank you for the opportunity to present this paper. Very happy to take any questions.
And Claire, do you want to add anything? Or
I think John more or less covered it all, other than we talked a lot about things that we're going to do. A lot of those are in place already or on track. So common data model, for example, a lot of the design in Regulatory Connect is considering that and what's used throughout the UK and external as well. So AI we've talked about quite a bit. That's well on its way in different shapes and forms. So what we've tried to do, we talk about the what, but also the how, and start to bring the strategy to life, but at the right pace, so we can still incorporate feedback and so on into that.
Great. Look, I mean, I think thank you, and it's great to hear about the cross-agency working, which is fantastic. Paul.
No, thank you. I mean, it's gone through a number of iterations. Very good report. I mean, I wonder whether it'd be worth spelling out the importance of all of this for patient safety, and so just being explicit on that. And that's one of the key reasons why we need the data on drug and device performance in the real world, not just us, but also the other stakeholders in terms of patients that we've talked about earlier. And really, if we're going to evolve to a sort of a quality by design health system in the UK, we've got to have the flow of data. And one of my frustrations is that we know that, but we're having to sort of beg really other organisations for that data and then pay for it. And I just don't think that's right if we're going to do what's best for patients. having said that, so my question is, there's a question as well. Do we have enough data scientists and analysts? And assuming the answer to that is no, how do we address that challenge?
I'm happy to start off there. I think so. I think there are a range of different skill sets which we require in order to deliver this strategy. I think data science and data analytics are certainly part of that, but I think we also need to consider the broader skill set, particularly around data engineering, software engineering, all of our kind of strategy and architecture type activities within digital and technology. Within my area, for example, we'd also be thinking about epidemiology, we'd be thinking about data management. So how do we recognise that across the broader ecosystem, there's this proliferation of secure data environments and trusted research environments. And this is really a new and emerging model of data access to make sure, to make sure we've got the capacity and the capabilities to navigate that, to make sure we can navigate all of the information governance requirements, making sure that patients know that they can trust the activities that are undertaken with respect to their data. So making sure we navigate that appropriately, managing those relationships into the future. I think there are a range of opportunities to increase our kind of resource there. For example, through some activities we do hope will become cost recoverable through fees in the future. That's relatively more in the kind of advisory and innovation enabling type activities. We'll also be considering opportunities through partnerships, for example, through grant funding, and of course there are also opportunities through business cases and future spending review.
Claire and then Alison.
Yeah, just to add to that, so John's talked about the array of different specialisms and different roles to support a data strategy. We're looking at, and again have started to implement different ways to achieve that. So some are more short term, some will take longer, but it goes from growing talent, so apprenticeships or retraining and so on, partnering with industry and learning at pace from them, so bringing those skills in-house as well. Good old-fashioned recruitment, but being really considered around where we recruit and so on. So all sorts of different shapes and forms, and also just looking at our current roles as well and how we might sort of tweak those and upskill. So quite a lot of work has gone into that as well. And I should say, not in silos, so looking across our areas in particular, Alison and my area, but also Laura's, because AI and data and so on is across the organisation. So we want to make sure we don't have those silos of roles that only work in a particular area. So we have more economies of scale and efficiencies there.
I would only just add that, you know, the academic partnerships will be absolutely key to this. So the Centres of Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation would be a key tool whereby we can understand and keep pace with what's happening in the academic community and to inform our decision making and activities. So those partnerships across the UK health data ecosystem, both across government but also academia, will be absolutely critical.
Okay. Michael, did you want to come in and work for us? Or?
I just got some comments.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. I think the paper is very good, and so thank you for bringing it. I've got two observations. One is we are at the start of a new parliament and a new government, and the question I'd put to you is, are we being sufficiently brave in terms of where the system at the moment doesn't work as well as it could in giving this agency the information it needs to be more confident about patient safety? You know, is now the time to be saying to a new administration, we could do more in the data space, but actually this is what we need. And I think it's more important that we say this now than in the future. My second point is much smaller, but I think is important internally. Reading the paper, I can understand your nervousness about risks and to delivery and resources and all you're going to get. So the strength of the paper is it's great, it's integrated across the whole of the organisation. But that means there's a potential that all the things that you want to do get subsumed within the day-to-day job. And I just would say that building on this, I think you need to go away and think about the overall governance of implementing this programme. And to get the support of this board, I think we need to have clear deliverables that we can actually track. I'm not suggesting, you know, detailed governance, but I think high-level milestones that we can be confident that we're delivering this and can support you in ensuring that it's appropriate
Michael,
resource.
I'm going to think that's
Yes,
really
sorry.
helpful. I'm going to anticipate what Alison's about to ask you. So there's a list of deliverables. Do you want to just expand a little bit on what you think is needed on top of that?
There are a lot of deliverables, and I just say some are more precise than others, and I know that's always inevitable.
Sorry.
Some are more precise than others. The one that I think is the golden thread is the ability to link secondary and primary care data. I think the whole thing around linking the yellow card to the electronic record, and I think we need to be a bit braver in that space and to say, by this date, this is what we hope to have achieved. And if we haven't achieved it, it's a signal to this board to come and support you, to say, what more do we need to do? It's that sort of precision that I would like.
No, I think that's helpful. Do you want to, you or others, come back on that?
Yeah, and obviously, for reassurance, the health tech data ecosystem is incredibly complex, and there is a large number of players in that field, a large number of data owners. So the data, as Paul's alluded to, where the data sits is complex. Access to that data rightly has strong governance around it, because it needs to be, because it may be, you know, patient-level data, and we must make sure that appropriate controls are in place. I guess we are members of multiple fora, so I think that that's important to highlight, and we do vocally and repeatedly highlight what is needed to ensure that we can adequately assess the performance and the risk, the benefit risk of products on the market. But absolutely take your point. We will continue to be vocal in that space, because it is critical for us to understand how products are really performing.
And before others come in, if I could just pick up the milestone, the deliverables piece. I mean, you've put classifications by each one about existing resource, new resource. So you've touched on partnerships and grants as mechanisms for some of these, but then for others you haven't specified. Well, you said additional resource. So is this additional resource that you're then needing to ask for, or that is planned for, or how is that additional resource going to come to deliver this?
Yeah, I can come back on several points. So firstly, just to acknowledge Michael's point and agree with him that I think this discussion has helpfully surfaced that the MHRA is a key consumer for real-world data and real-world evidence. And I think the strategy, both for pre-authorization and post-authorization decisions, and I think we have purposefully tried, particularly within Theme 2, to articulate the regulatory needs for real-world data. On the second point around milestones and resourcing, I'm certainly thank you for the feedback, and I'm very happy to sort of take that away and develop more granularity around the governance and the delivery. And I agree that the governance is a really key element of this.
When I mean governance, it's really to help you, that there needs to be a programme board that oversees this, and, you know, that with some way of ensuring that you've got appropriate money earmarked from it, and being very clear, is this part of an existing programme or is it new money? Because, you know, if I was taking a commercial decision on this, I'd want to know what was the return on my investment, but I don't really know what the investment is at the moment, and that's the problem. It's not a criticism, it's to help you, really.
So specifically on the question around resourcing, I think some aspects of the strategy would require some short-term resourcing. So, for example, the scientific dialogue programme, and there's some degree of resourcing for that in this financial year. Our objective with that programme would be for it to become cost recoverable through fees in the near term. Some of the activities, for example, will be delivered through existing resource in safety and surveillance and in the digital and technology group. I do recognise that there are some activities that will need consideration over the lifetime of the strategy in terms of how we resource those, for example, through business cases, and also recognising the fact that we now have a new government in terms of future spending review.
Okay, so there were a couple of hands up. Sorry, June, and then...
And just to build on what John's saying, analogue to digital is one of the main themes, as well as hospital to community. And clearly we want to see prevention replacing a sickness service. So this is absolutely central. And I just wanted to build, and thanks to Michael for raising it. Many of these deliverables talk about next year or this year and ongoing. And I think we need some fixed milestones around some of the main areas, data linkages, which are really critical, new tools and methodologies, which aren't, you know, a mile away, but we could be embedding them, trialling them, using them. And then I think the expertise and capability needs a hard look. So it's a long list at the moment, but if we get an internal governance in place, I think we should see some key milestones delivered. I think that the incoming government will be very much in favour of driving this, and we can lead some of it rather than just be a contributing partner.
Yeah, and we'll come back to the point Paul raised, but Mercy?
I like it. It's good. It's a good, clear strategy. That's always good start.
Next question.
So the next bit is about delivery of it, really. And I know certainly, Alison, on PSEC, we've talked about this. So I'm sure your lay and patient involvement bit will go from governance, endpoints, confidence about the use of the data. So just at each delivery point, about how lay and patient involvement will support you really in building up that confidence and really getting the best outcomes on this. Just a reminder.
Yeah, thank you. Hader, I think.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I echo what Mercy said. I really like this. I think it has improved since the last time we saw this, and I think it's a really strong document. And I don't have a question, I've just got a couple of comments. So I think my note of caution would be that there's lots in here, and I think we talked about that last time we saw this, and very much echo what colleagues have said around milestones. Probably caution not having too many milestones as well, and again focusing on the really key topics. And I think for me, the work we're doing around the RMS, and I think John, you mentioned that, is really critical, because if we don't have our own house in order, then all the partnerships we make externally will not be as strong and will struggle. So I think, you know, for me, delivering the RMS probably has to be one of the first big milestones, and then we can really build on that. And then I think the last thing I'd say is we have to make ourselves more relevant to who we want data from. It has to be a two-way road, so thinking of providers and things like that. You know, all the training in the world and the education is not going to give us that data set. It has to be a two-way road. So I think that's maybe a thought I'd leave you with. How do we really drive that? But really, really great work, and congrats to your team. I think it's a really strong strategy.
Any reflections before Mandy comes in?
I just totally agree. You know, I think it's really important that in every fora we articulate what is needed from the perspective of the MHRA, because I think often it's not appreciated. That's certainly my perspective, and very much the focus is often on research and development, but we need it to deliver on our regulatory commitments and to ensure products are as safe as possible. And so, yeah, absolutely take your point about the importance of raising that whenever possible.
Mandy?
Yeah, and I think it's building quite a lot on what Hader said. I think this has moved on a lot, so it's really good. I'm thinking about in terms of making it a reality. There's again, how can we focus on deliverables to patients that's not spoken in data terms, but if we can say we're making this class of medicines more safe, or we're going to enable earlier access through ways a trial can be designed with real-world evidence, we can then begin to be much more specific, which I think as a sort of pilot and part of the education would be very valuable. So in terms of articulating some of those major milestones in terms of impact on patients and public health could be quite powerful for bringing together, addressing the data sets, rather than it being some data we want. We want it because, and this will then deliver. So, you know, phase 1 clinical trials in a particular area might be a good place to start, and where we've got a start already. And then we can build on that and build trust, because we've got quite a high trust level, I believe. and we can look at people, how they can trust us with their data because of our positioning, rather than maybe a commercial company where there's a little bit more reticence. So we can build on that as well.
Okay, reflections on that?
I think we could improve or put a lay summary in which really articulates that more clearly, because John, I don't know if we've discussed, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. That might be helpful in terms of really bringing it to life.
And that sort of goes back slightly to Paul's original comment about something up front, just being really not taking anything as assumed, I think. Claire?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the trick with any strategy. So it's the so what, what's this going to do for me, whether you're a patient or partner and so on. So I just think outcomes focused and maybe talking in those terms, depending on the audience, rather than data, if that makes sense as well. So and maybe running through a few use cases alongside those milestones as well will show its value and get feedback in order to iterate through it as well and make improvements.
I think use cases are always going to be important to us, aren't they? You know, thinking about annual reports and so forth. Junaid, did you still? Yep.
So I just wanted to also echo the thanks I think that others have shared, because it's easy for us to nitpick, isn't it? But actually, I think it's not just the destination, it's the journey to get to the destination that's really, really important. And the collaboration that I've seen and the way that you've engaged me personally and others around the table to this is really, really welcome. So thank you for all your efforts to it. I think we are fundamentally a data-driven organisation, and it's not just the work that we've been doing retrospectively, but it's the work that we're going to have to be thinking about moving forward. And the global context of our work, that means that this is actually a major priority, I think, in my view, for the agency. And I think June's Forward talks to that really well. Maybe worth us thinking about explicitly, where are we net consumers of data and where are we net contributors of data? And if we understand those from a lens of impact, what prioritization would we do on the deliverables and activities that you have? I think this is a bench strength that we actually fundamentally need to have across the organisation and across the MHRA in terms of our work on safety, on research and on trials, if we want the UK to stand apart and stand differentially, for us to be the place where trials take place in the future as well. So thank you again, and I think it's still a journey. We haven't reached the destination, but what we can do to support, let us know.
Great. Glenn, last comment maybe.
I think I've probably mentioned before that we've got statutory powers to get information from the Health and Social Care Information Centre, as was called. We do in the MMD Act 2021 and then the Healthcare Act 2022, both on medicines and devices. I just wondered how we're going to pick those up in the context of this strategy. I realise that's still a complex conversation to have, but we can certainly ask for information systems to be created on, for example, safety and efficacy of medicines and medical devices. That's a lot of data, but I didn't see it in there unless I missed it. I just wonder how we're going to maybe pull on those powers to make that happen.
Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, just say thank you for the constructive feedback, particularly around developing milestones and programme management. I'm really happy to take that forwards. Just to address Glenn's point, I fully agree that it's really important that we engage in dialogue with the broader ecosystem, but also that we recognise the quite a large number of activities that are already ongoing at various stages of development in the ecosystem. For example, the Secure Data Environments programme through NHS England, but also activities in the devolved nations, for example, the Scottish Safe Haven programme, and recognise programmes like NHS England's Outcomes and Registries platform, and of course also the FDP additionally. So I think really the key element of this strategy is constructively engaging with those programmes at an early stage and recurrently, so that we can articulate our regulatory needs to them. So as we've said, they can sort of be designed with those regulatory needs in mind. And I think in terms of surfacing those requirements, this document itself is a very helpful vehicle to surface those to the broader ecosystem.
Great. Look, I think unless there's any final comment, we'll finish there. But I mean, thank you. And I think what you're hearing is very strong support and enthusiasm for the report. So thank you again to you and to your teams for all the work that's gone into this. It's clearly been a long journey, and the journey's still carrying on, but it's been a lot of progress. And I think you've heard some hopefully useful feedback. I think that within the deliverables, a steer to perhaps have fewer, slightly higher level milestones that we can then keep reviewed. And I think probably at some point in the autumn, it would be good to get an update as to where you've got with that in terms of internal discussions. I think what you've heard is a lot of support for the idea that data is actually a critical part of the whole organisational mission, and that hopefully then justifies a slightly different way of governing this strategy. So that's something for you to think about. And again, it would be useful to get an update as to how you think that's best done, how you're going to be able to make sure the resource is there across all the meanings of that word to deliver what you need to deliver. And then I think, and within that, I think you've had some specific steers on what those milestones might be, but I think we leave that to you to reflect on a little bit, whether it's RMS or whatever it might be, but also a clear steer about the framing for patients and some of these milestones. I think it's difficult to see patient perspective in the deliverables as they are, and I think thinking about that a little bit would be helpful. And leave it with you to think about. And then finally, I think what we're hearing is an ambition to really try and lead in this area. And I think across sector, we want to be making that case across government for why this matters to us, but also why, because it matters to us, it matters to the country as a whole, basically, and the system. So I think there's an opportunity for us to lead in this space on the back of that, in partnership, as you say. So thank you. Great. Let's move on. Thank you, John. You're welcome to stay or go. Looks like you're probably keen to go, which is good. We'll move on to board effectiveness and how we're going to assess that. Carly, you've got a short paper. Do you want to introduce?
Yes, thank you. So colleagues will be aware that in our terms of reference, we have a commitment to review the effectiveness of the board each year. We have delayed that somewhat in anticipation of the arrival of our new chair, but I think we've agreed that now is the time to push forward with that. So the proposed survey questions in the paper in front of you build on a previous iteration drawn from the NAO best practice guide and questions that we have used previously. The thinking there being that we will be able to do a little bit of comparison with what came out of our most recent review on these same terms, see where we have improved on those issues that are identified, see where new issues have arisen, and then the addition of a couple of open text questions at the end, including views on what priorities might be for the new chair once appointed. Depending on the outcome of this, we'll obviously analyse it anonymously and then come back to the board with the findings. I suspect there might be one conversation there and then perhaps a further piece of work to do once that permanent chair has landed.
Thank you. Comments on this? No, hopefully fairly straightforward. Anything, can you just talk a little bit about process and how you do this when we get the results?
So I think we will try and do it over the course of the summer so people can get their comments back to us whilst relaxing. So we can then bring that back together slightly less facetiously for discussion in early autumn.
Yeah, I'm just thinking what the best frame of mind to be in to respond is, but we won't. Challenging constructive comments are welcome.
Well, I don't know about is it. So this is we're doing a comparison, are we, to how we answered before, or I just can't remember how we looked at board effectiveness before.
So this is how we looked at it before. So I thought one benefit would be that we can see if there is anything striking between previous and current responses. But obviously we'll also take current responses on their own basis, if you like, and see what's emerging now. So not just a trend comparison.
And just another comment about subcommittees. Obviously, we have ODRC and ARAC kind of reports on this kind of thing, and they both talk about effectiveness of their committees. I don't think we've done really that much on PSEC, so it's probably a discussion outside this to really think about how we look at the effectiveness of PSEC. I'm also aware it was set up by the previous chair, and I don't know, and it's not, a statutory committee at all. So it needs to be reviewed, I think, as well by the new chair. and see if the structure that was really important on the back of Cumberledge, if it's still relevant, or have we integrated enough of stuff into the workings of the organisation, but how do we assure that for the board? So just some thoughts, probably outside this paper.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Very happy to pick that up. I think that's a really good question that you've posed there. We did look at the effectiveness of all of the assurance committees last year, and that did include PCO, but it was not as detailed as this. So there's perhaps something to think about there for the future.
It's just a comment in welcoming this opportunity while we're all relaxing, or rather reflecting. We did agree after a nice piece of work, which was a sort of brainstorm, on the charter. It'd be nice to circulate that again if colleagues just need a bit of refreshing as to what we all committed to. And I think that will key us into the mindset of reflection. Thank you.
Great, so if that could be circulated with the
Yes,
question.
thank you.
Great. Okay, well, look, thank you. I think that's approved, and we can look forward to receiving the, I presume it's an online link. I don't remember doing it last time.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Great. So we'll move on to the other committees, as mentioned by Mercy. So ODRC, Mandy, report.
Okay, thanks, the ODRC last met in May. We have quite a broad remit, so we were asked to look at the progress of the Return to Green programme, look how quality processes and governance will be embedded into the ways of working, and then to discuss the scope and priorities for the development of the MHRA workforce plan. Now, while these might seem quite separate things, they actually all connect quite closely together. So we had a review of Regulatory Connect, and then we looked at how the Return to Green programme was constructed and how it was being governed and the progress it was making. And then how that could be, how the quality and sustainable services, the way we deliver those services, would then connect with the design of those services. And obviously supporting that was workforce planning. So there's several work streams that are going on, and ODRC was trying to then look at those together and make sure they complement each other to make a more effective organisation. So I think on the specifics, we were very happy to see that we'd seen sustained performance with clinical trials, and that those changes were being embedded, and then that was then seeing how Return to Green can build on that when it's looking at some of the other areas we're looking at where we have some backlogs. So I think that was very positive. We saw the project approach to the Return to Green workforce, and the fact that we were actually getting much better metrics together. So these things are beginning to join together and build on each other, and we're trying to really support cross-functional learning. There was a quality assurance and governance review which Carly instigated and was undertaken by EY to give us an independent assessment. And they provided some data and recommendations on some of both the quantitative but some of the cultural improvements that the agency can make, which help sustain change in our organisation development. We saw and we encouraged the Return to Green programme to really build in those cultural and quality principles so that our business processes become sustained. And it's not just you do A, B and C, it's not just workflow, it's about how we sustain that, how we have the right governance processes so individuals aren't left with a big responsibility and feel quite alone. And we provide that through governance and quality management processes. Regulatory Connect and our improvement in our systems landscape is obviously a key enabler to us being a more effective service organisation. I think the committee were very welcome the phase 1 delivery, and that's been a very significant milestone for Regulatory Connect, and that was recognised. And we're getting good feedback from the changes that have been made in terms of things like self-service. The delivery date for phase 2 is at risk, and I think we've discovered that to some extent. We've still got work to do in looking about how you improve the processes, and I think a lot of work was done during discovery, but that was a sort of bottom up. We now need to look at what is the best processes, not just trying to use data to replace the processes we have today. And I think the learning we've had from clinical trials and the backlogs work is giving us an insight like we've never had before in how we can improve and sustain our services. And it's very important that those teams are now building that in to give Claire's teams the architecture of which they can then construct the technology around. And then we talked about the workforce planning, and that came out of the last board meeting where we said there's quite a lot of resourcing. It underpins quite a lot of what we do, and is often cited as being a bit of a challenge to achieving milestones. So the importance of that workforce plan, and it's very complicated in terms of that, of pulling that together. So we had some discussion about how that can help, and some of the principles that we would expect Liz and her team to integrate into that planning process. So I think, ultimately we are judged on the quality of our decision making and the services we deliver by the outside world, and that comprises of many factors in terms of our processes, our ways of doing things, which Return to Green is trying to embed and learn from. And then it's got to be supported by the technology, and as I think, Heidi, you said before, Regulatory Connect is absolutely fundamental. We've seen the difference Safety Connect is beginning to make in that decision making, so it's still a top priority. And then when we have a workforce plan, that begins to pull together our ability to recruit and develop our capability. And it's only when those three things get to a level of maturity that we can build sustainable future. So I think we're recognising those. There are good programmes in all of those areas taking place, but there's still work to do.
Great, thank you. That's a very good summary. Any comments or questions for Mandy? Yeah.
Really just a comment about how useful it is, I think, for the board to have a committee that looks in more detail about how all these things connect as well. I particularly like the quality and sustainable services kind of aspect of it, but that I know kind of in committee you can have more time to look at these things and to go into more detail. So that's just, it is an assurance for the board. So thank you.
I would just add to that, it's incredibly helpful for the executive. The ability to keep that focus on these internet-connected areas is the absolute requisite to moving it forward. And as we know, we don't want to waste any time, so I'd like to say thank you as well. It's invaluable to have that being held to account in terms of the assurances on these related issues. And I think the biggest issue really for us is that move in our cultural approach, which is coming out through Return to Green.
Any other comments? So lots of very positive things. Just to ask, I mean, so you talk about the delivery of Regulatory Connect Phase 2 at risk. Can you just sort of say what that risk is?
I think there was, the delivery date is November 24 for Phase 2. At the time, and again this was in May, we felt that work plan wasn't probably going to hit November, so we need to go back and look at that. I don't know. I haven't had a recent update. Maybe that's an action we can take.
I don't know if anyone can talk to it here, but just do we have a sense of whether it's December or where that might be?
we didn't at the time.
Okay.
We felt that there was the designing of the processes was at that time a little bit more immature, I think. We had the discovery work, but what we hadn't got was what the to-be really looked like.
Okay. Claire, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just briefly, because Mick's the SRO,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
don't
No, I
want
appreciate
to,
that.
But a real deep dive into replanning with delivery dates that Mick is really competent in is ongoing and soon to be presented. I think I've not seen the new plan, but I think Mick has seen it this week,
Okay.
so it's
So
that
we
new
can-
and that fresh. So, but lots of work going into that, and a lot more work actually from my team to help suppliers, because one of the issues that we've had is around estimation of the size of the work, and obviously then that has an impact on delivery dates. So just being a bit more realistic around those, and being more involved in delivery rather than just assuring as well. So yeah, lots going on there, but Mick can talk to that in much more detail.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you. Any other comments? If not, very good job. Thank you. Thank you thank you to all the committee for the work. It's fantastic. Finally, so last but not least, Michael, ARAC, annual report.
Thank you. It's always good to finish on audit.
It's the pinnacle.
Pinnacle, yeah. Just to say a few things, I hope people will take the paper as read. It was interesting drawing on a point that Mercy made. I think it's important to remember that the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee is a statutory committee, and it is staffed by non-executives in its totality. It doesn't include executive members. As such, executive members come, and we're always grateful for their contribution, but the Audit Committee, in accordance with the requirement, means that we are fully staffed by non-executive directors, and we are now supported by an independent advisor. Good practice set out in the Treasurer's Orange Book is that the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee should present each year an annual report to the board, and this is what I've done. It covers the year 23-24. Obviously, like the other committees, provide an annual an assurance update after every meeting, but this is to look at the totality of the committee's work over the last year. I think it has been very positive, and there are areas of improvement. So the main areas of independent advice and assurance that the committee draws on is the work of internal audit. And you will see in this paper that the number of moderate and substantial ratings have improved compared to previous years, and indeed have improved as the last 12 months have progressed. And that is a really good outcome. Internal audit are required each year to provide an annual assurance to the accounting officer around the overall governance arrangements, and you'll see in the report that this year it is limited assurance. I think, and I hope I reflect this, internal audit's assessment is that there has been significant improvements. They are not in any way questioning the financial controls of the agency, which remain sound. I think what they're referring to here is the overall ability in the way in which the organisation delivers some of its activities, and inevitably internal audit had to draw on the performance issues that the organisation faced over the last 12 months, and which Return to Green is seeking to resolve. It is good practice where you have a limited assurance that you should have a clearly defined plan to get you back to moderate. And again, I'm very pleased to report that under Carly's leadership and the governance team, we do have a return to moderate plan, which I think is well developed and spot on in terms of addressing the issues that internal audit have raised. And the committee will look at the plan in a little bit more detail, but I genuinely believe it's substantially a very good document, and we will monitor progress over the next year. I would say it is really important that we do return to moderate over the next 12 months, because it is a clear indicator of the agency's overall performance and how it deals with standard management issues. There are other good things that I really want to highlight. I think the agency's work on risk management has progressed tremendously well. It's very well defined. I think, in my view, it's first of class, and this is reflected in the substantial rating that internal audit gave it. Drawing on what Mandy said, I think understanding risk appetite, getting risk appetite embedded within the organisation, and getting a good understanding of individual risk-taking when you're making a regulatory decision, and the support that corporate risk management provides to those individual decision-making is important as part of the cultural change as we move forward. In return to green, in the return to moderate, there are 4 areas which the internal audit have focused on, and you can see that from the paper. The final thing I'd say is that to support the agency, ARAC has sought to draw out a number of systemic areas that we need to focus on. I would like to put that in the context of it's more a goblet half full than half empty, and I think there are some really important seeds of progress that we can identify. Over the next 12 months, it's about maturing those seeds into something that results in a sustainable, resilient operating environment, and I think that's the challenge that go forward. Something that I've always focused on throughout my career, which I think is really, really important, and I think we have some way to go in this organisation, it's around integration. I think what we're seeing is some really, really good things being done by Mick, Julian, James and others, and in corporate services, but it's really important that they come together in an integrated way to exploit synergies that benefit patients, but also realise economies of scale. And I think the same applies to corporate services. I'm not saying there isn't the appetite to deliver this, and integration is often very difficult to achieve in a sustained way. I think the will is there, and I think the role of this board is to support the executive in achieving that. I'll leave it there, Chair, but those are the main points that I wanted to highlight.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that summary. Comments or questions from Michael? Yeah.
I would just like to say on behalf of the executive how much we value the really important insights that ARAC is offering. Value the comments, positive comments about the progress that has been made this year, but fully recognise that there is a way to go, that we do have a route to moderate plan, and that we'll be relentlessly keeping pace on that, the various elements that have been carefully set out. And I think in the final point on exploiting synergies, absolutely correct. We're intent to do that, both operationally and in terms of corporate services. So thank you for the direction and thank you for the clarity. Now it's up to us at the executive.
Comments? Yeah, Mercy.
Just 2 comments. I agree about risk management being so much better, and great for Carly's team to kind of give us that clarity. It's also, there is a lot of it as well, I have to say, when I come to ARAC. So there's a lot to take on, but it's really well done. So so that's really encouraging. And also just to thank Michael for involving me as chair of the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee as well, which is really good to get that perspective from my committee. Is there any kind of overlap, or there things that we need to have risk management kind of eyes on too? So that has been really useful, and so just to acknowledge that.
Great.
Thank you for your contribution as well.
Thank you. Could I just understand a bit about the route to moderate programme? So how is that governed, and how does that fit into?
So we are, as Michael has said, developing route to moderate at the moment with all members of the executive, because it will touch all areas of the organisation. It will be coordinated through Governance Office. We will enable the report to EXCO in the first instance, and then we will report on that same plan back to ARAC on a quarterly or more basis. We will make sure that the board have sight of the plan once it's agreed. It's got some clear milestones throughout the year, and we're particularly focusing on where we can get to working with GIA as much as possible by around January in order to be confident going into the audit opinion for this current year ahead of the focus at sort of March, April time.
Okay. So board will have sight of that roughly when, do you think?
I think really it should be possible to share that by the autumn.
Okay.
It needs to be rapidly agreed and progressed. And there are first milestones that we'll be delivering by the end of July to ensure that we have a baseline grip on all of the activities that need to be driven forward.
Okay. Claire?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some context. I hesitated to do so because I don't want to come across as defensive, but the context I wanted to provide was digital and technology has had quite a lot of audits, and therefore it's no surprise that a lot of issues have been identified, and it was underinvested in for a while, and so on and so on. So there's a reason for that. But as hard as it's been to see things that I might have suspected were amiss or wrong or very wrong and needed to be fixed, as difficult as that has been to see in black and white and red, although that one's changed now, I suppose the silver lining is a couple of things. Number one, should be no more skeletons in digital and technologies cupboards, bring out your dead and all the rest of it. But it's helped us really focus and prioritise on what we want to work on, and those synergies as well, how it supports other parts of the organisation, whether it's RMS, etc., and just helps support where I ask for extra funding and extra resource and that kind of thing. So that is the silver lining, and so a lot to work on there, and I think making really good progress as well. So yeah, that's that context. I hope it's helpful.
Okay, thank you. Any reflections? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult one. I would not doubt that the organisation has made steps forward, and it's Claire's comments are very supportive, and I think it reflects here an assessment at the beginning of the financial year of unsatisfactory to an assessment more recently that is a marked improvement. I think the issue has really got to be that, like the whole of the public sector and the wider private sector, cyber is with us now forever and a day, and we need to be able to demonstrate to all our stakeholders that we're managing at that as best as we can. And I would agree with Claire that it does require resource investment, and we need to go further in that space. So her comments are very helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, look, thank you, and thank you again to ARAC and everybody who's worked as part of ARAC. It's really helpful. And I think, as you say, lots of evidence of progress. Clearly, more work to be done in some areas, and we recognise that. But it's good to see that that's all documented. So thank you. And I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. I think I'm minded to formally thank Fleur Ruder, who's left as legal lead at the end of the year. And other than that, I think we shall close the meeting. So thank you to everybody who's watched the board meeting today. Particularly like to thank the staff in the agency who've contributed to the production of the papers and supported the meeting. And finally, before we leave, just to remind us that everybody who is watching, that the purpose of the MHRA is to protect and improve public health. We continue to do that by enabling scientific innovation, by accelerating patient access to new products, and by strengthening our patient safety and surveillance systems. So with that in mind, I'll close the meeting, and thank you.